I think they're very significant awards, and that's because the Nobel Committee appears to be signalling that journalism is in peril, and in peril globally in a way that it hasn't been affected and afflicted since World War II. The last time the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded for acts of journalism, if you like, it was 1936, and the recipient was a German editor who was languishing in a concentration camp, having been placed there by the Nazis. So, I don't think you could get stronger symbolism to demonstrate the perspective that journalists are under attack physically, digitally, politically, legally, being harassed en masse, both online and offline. And I think it's particularly significant that one of the recipients actually was a woman, because we see women journalists really sitting at the epicenter of a conflagration of risks at this point in the 21st century.
What do you mean by that?
In Maria's case, she's assaulted on an hourly basis with threats of rape, death, violent assault, where she is falsely conflated with fake news, where she is harassed in such a way that we concluded in our research that she actually is being the victim of an enabling environment, partly created and facilitated by the platforms, and then fueled and exploited by the Duterte regime. And in that experience is a lot of, sexualized threats and abuse. And so I think we now see women on the front line of these fights in ways that we didn't a century ago.
Yeah, and tell me a bit about Dmitry Muratov in Russia.
Yeah, so there you have, an editor who has held the line for several decades, having founded or co-founded Russia's, really last remaining significant independent journalism outfit, partly funded by Gorbachev, after he won the Nobel Prize. In fact, some of his prize money was contributed to that. Having established this news outlet with really significant global recognition attached to it, to the credibility of their reporting. I mean, they lost 6 journalists. 6 journalists have been murdered since the outlet was started. That is, I think, a significant testament to perseverance and courage, of course, the work that's done there. But in the Russian context, you have an increasing number of journalists and editors and outlets being branded as foreign agents because of the work that they're doing, which is another of the trends we're seeing internationally, the criminalization of journalism.
And do you think that the Nobel Peace Prizes really make a difference will make a difference to the future of journalism?
I actually think it's more momentous than I expected it to be. I co-lead a coalition of international organisations called the Hold the Line Coalition, which was formed to support and defend Maria Ressa and Rappler and journalists in the Philippines more broadly after her conviction on a trumped-up charge of cyber libel. We're seeing evidence of that diplomatically. We're seeing evidence of that certainly in terms of the way the global news media has been fired up, to even more loudly defend press freedom, and with a sense of pride in, critical independent journalism, which is what we're fighting to preserve.
You head up research at the International Centre for Journalism. Tell me about that organisation and its role in protecting journalists and how you see or how it sees the future of journalism.
So ICFJ has been around for nearly 40 years. It seeks to seed and support both startup efforts and journalism that might appear to be more traditional on the surface, insofar as it might be investigative, it might be journalism that's designed to respond to a particular crisis in a particular context, particularly in fragile democracies, for example. And it's about trying to ensure that journalists have both the capacity and the skills and the support to innovate in ways that actually help preserve the fundamental principles of journalism rather than just toying with technology for the heck of it. It's also an organisation that recognises and rewards international journalists such as Maria Ressa, a host of others, particularly in Eastern Europe, for example, in parts of Africa, in other parts of Asia, where doing journalism is potentially life-threatening and certainly often involves the threat of incarceration. So it's a combination of media development and media freedom work that I think tells us something about the future, and that is it has to be continuously a matter of reinventing the ways we can connect to audiences and ensure that we have a viable profession in terms of its sustainability financially.
And in the Western countries, the economic pressures are really important. How do you see the future, or how do you see moving beyond the worst aspects of tabloid journalism, clickbait, etc., to something a bit more promising?
So I think we have to avoid what we've termed shiny things syndrome, where we're technology-led, and particularly in the past decade, platform-led. I think we have to be increasingly critical of the power that the platforms wield and the ways in which they have attempted to set the agenda for journalism, even through soft power type plays. I think that they have a role potentially in funding critical independent journalism, but that needs to be at a much greater distance from the practice of journalism than it currently is. I think that genuinely is one of our biggest challenges, and it's one that we've kind of sleepwalked into in a state of desperation for funding.
Yeah, so I take it, I'm going to assume that you're an optimist for the future because you're working in the field, but what do you see journalism looking like in 15 to 20 years?
I run two projects that are relevant to this. One is the Online Violence Project in partnership with UNESCO, and another is the Journalism and the Pandemic Project in partnership with Columbia University's Tao Center for Digital Journalism. And in the context of both of those big projects, which are global and involve a lot of partners, researchers and institutions, I have both been more pessimistic on the one hand and more optimistic on the other. Pessimistic because of the scale of the problems that we're looking at. I'm more optimistic on the other hand because this period and what we've learned has presented both, catastrophic losses, but also real gains in terms of insight and in terms of critical engagement with questions of the future of journalism. So for years as a journalist and academic, I was a bit flummoxed by the lack of critical engagement with these questions, in newsrooms. It was almost like this was happening out there, these debates and these crises. Now I have a real sense that, at every desk, at every laptop, on every phone where a journalist is working, there is a real understanding of what we're fighting for and why. And I think that commitment to credible, reliable, independent journalism has actually increased in the context of these crises for those who can remain to fight. And at the same time, it's given us a chance to understand our audiences better and to realise the purpose of that, close engagement with communities, which is where journalism began.
Terrific. Julie Posetti, thank you so much.